Good evening, everyone. We're starting off with this podcast series with the intention to talk to important philosophers, artists, creative practitioners uh, who are talking or who are working around ideas of migration, who are talking about ideas of politics, who are talking about ideas of history. With us today, we have Zeigam Azizov. Zeigam Azizov is a British artist and a philosopher. He was born on the 13th of April 1963 in the former USSR, Azerbaijan SSR, and currently lives and works in London. His work addresses questions of time, image, and the narrative procedures of globalization with the languages of migration, media, and new mimesis. He uses material that resembles means of writing and media images and transforming them into the conceptual art to comment on the philosophical elaboration of the technologically constructed time. He was trained in art, philosophy, and cultural theory in the UK, France, and Austria. He completed his studies in philosophy in England in the early 1990s, what he couldn't receive in the former Soviet Union for ideological reasons, although initially planned to devote himself to philosophy completely. Later, he started his PhD in philosophy first at Goldsmiths University of London, UK, and completed at the Klagenfurt University, Austria, with thesis on French philosopher Bernard Stiegler's work and a philosophical exploration of images. Since the middle of 1980s, actively involved in the art world, exhibiting and publishing his work, as well as developing the body of work which brings together his philosophical interests. Taking his artistic studies as a philosophical activity, art as philosophy, philosophy as art, he has exhibited and written texts about his projects extensively. He's one of the pioneering artists to study the migration paradigm as a novel understanding of the movement of globalization and space-time relationships, what he calls migrosophia, migration plus philosophy. Since 1993, this project was partly made in collaboration with the cultural theorist Stuart Hall, who became a close friend and collaborator. He exhibited his work worldwide, including most recently the Venice Biennale, the Azerbaijan Pavilion in 2019, 2011, as well as the main exhibition of the Venice Biennale in 2003, Utopia Station. Tate Modern London in the UK in 2006, Haus der Kunst Munich, Germany in 2004, Grazer Kunstwerk Graz, Austria in 2002, and TN Probe, Tokyo, Japan in 2001, amongst others. As part of his practice, he has been lecturing and teaching in different universities, including the University of California, Central St. Martin's College of Art and Design, Goldsmiths University of London, Vienna Academy of Art, and University of Aberdeen, University of Klagenfurt, Middlesex University. He also lectured worldwide in galleries and museums. Since 2023, Zeigam has also been actively involved in mentoring and taking lectures for young curatorial fellows in India as a part of Gallery Splash's curatorial fellowship. I welcome Zeigam over here, and also I thank you for taking time out for this particular conversation. This particular conversation, as we've kind of titled it, as Zeigam has very kindly titled it, Globalization before Modernism. So we hope to engage in like a 45-minute conversation and see where it goes from there. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Satyajit. It is very kind of you to invite me to be involved in this project in India. It's for me a huge experience, of course. And as you know, I'm very much into globalization because I love the world. I really always hope that the world becomes more and more globalized. Quite on contrary to many people who think that globalization is a damage. I am going to talk about it a little further. What is it? And just to say that we are also talking about this question in very turbulent times. You know, what is happening in our world, this unexpected, well, I use this unexpected or even surprises, because modernism, you know, when for hundreds or so years secured specifically Europe and countries that were looking towards Europe, that we are in a wonderful world creating new ideas, new images, art, technologies are just, creating miracles. We're moving towards something really incredibly beautiful world, which I hope we will at some point arrive this. But now and then we realize that actually there are so many problems are taking place. And why it is happening like this? Both as a philosopher, as an artist, and also as a I'm very much interested in politically engaged person. I always had a question, and always reminding to myself a phrase coming from Émile Zola, who in the early 20th century, French writer, novelist Émile Zola, who said, if in this world, even one person is unhappy, you cannot be happy. And I think that today we must accentuate this idea even more. Anyway, it is for people who care about the world, I guess. And my first interest in globalization, deeper involvement in globalization started with my project Migrasophia, which, if you remember, I talked earlier and you mentioned earlier. Thank you very much for this. And that was very much idea of trying to find an answer to why things are happening now and then, like wars, like misunderstanding between countries, etc., etc. For this particular reason, I initiated this artistic philosophical project, a little bit in the style of Walter Benjamin, of course, imitating to Walter Benjamin, rather than, of course, trying to build sort of ongoing project which would address these questions in different means, like in paintings, drawings, films, and texts.
Oh.
And it was of this particular time when I met Stuart Hall, a great cultural theorist, Stuart Hall. I had a long conversation with him, and once he told me, globalization starts from 1492, 192. When Columbus has arrived, attention, by mistake, to America. So he was actually moving towards India, but he
Yes.
has arrived in America by mistake. So it will be very important. I will explain later about this, the role of mistake here also. Something similar also, I'm sure you know, Sylvia Wynter, a Jamaican writer and philosopher. She also wrote, her text is called, I think, 1492, The World View, beautiful text. So this is really, but I believe, personally, I believe that globalization is a primal impulse of humanity from the very start of humanity, from very early contact of humanity with images, with ideas. Globalization starts because one person desires to understand another person. By all means, I mean, it's not necessarily has to be intellectual or artistic. There are many different ways of communicating, which we don't even know, to be honest with you. After all this thousands of years of adventure of ideas, like, Alfred North Whitehead, so adventures of ideas. The world is adventure of ideas. And as the other day with you, we were talking, as you rightly talked about process. I also believe that the entire history of globalization is a process. Entire history of formation of humanity is a process. And we do use all these terms, nation, race, gender, all wonderful, beautiful terms. But we must remember that they are used for convenience only. Like Jean-Jacques Rousseau was saying, it is a social agreement. We agree to talk about, but we know what is it about in our hearts, and we all know that human being, after all, ends up by trying to create his or her own repertoire of existence, really. And this repertoire of existence usually demands openness to the world, openness to the world cultures, openness to the world music, etc., etc. So in this sense, I think globalization is a ongoing process. And for myself, I decided that modernism, which disrupted globalization, has also opened the way to a new phase of globalization. Let me repeat again. Modernism, what I said, globalization before modernism, and then modernism, which disrupts it. I will explain this idea. And then again, through postmodernism, we have opened again a new globalization, which should not be denied. Of course, what we see in the world, unfortunately, what is happening, we all know, turbulence, as I said, associated with a war in Ukraine, a Middle East crisis. Plus, let's take events of last few days. Football hooligans beating up Jewish, football lovers in Amsterdam. Disaster. I don't even want to comment it. So we have this kind of very strange, barbaric attitude, although we want to think of ourselves standing on the peak of globalization and civilization, because soon machines will tell us what to do, or it really does. I have a very good friend in Leipzig in Germany. He created a robot which in the morning comes to him to say, Torsten, please have some coffee. So it is a sort of a degree of civilization. On the other hand, we still fight. That's also a time when I was working on my Yugoslavia, but also through my dialogues with Stuart Hall, I became very closely interested in the work of Bakhtin, Mikhail Bakhtin, especially his notion of the chronotope, time-space compression. And I started to think of globalization as a time-space compression, which connects places, people, and ideas, not necessarily in a very linear manner. That is why when Bakhtin was talking about this, he went into aesthetics. He says, it is in the world of aesthetics, nothing is really linear. Nothing really guaranteed that something happens before or after. It all happens contingently. So this is very important, of course, that we have to understand, as I said, so like how Columbus by chance has opened America, we must believe, we have to understand that the world really cannot be made according to our schema. There is also certain development, yet it should not cut us off from the culture. But what kind of culture, what I am thinking we need? Basically, recent philosophical theories like speculative realism, for example. I especially like the work of Quentin Meillassoux, who talks about the necessity of recognition of contingency only. Contingencies as, but it is a very important question, because contingency, what Henri Bergson, French philosopher Henri Bergson, in the early 20th century called contingencies are where the science of life. Contingencies, that is in the world of perfection, in the world of science, art, everything goes towards perfection. We exclude those things, so to speak, contingencies, as non-perfect things. But actually science of life in these contingencies. So therefore, I think that this obsessive idea of perfection that comes from the Western, now I will talk about Western philosophy, but it's also very true of probably entire world, this kind of making perfection as a main idea. I think we should finally move towards understanding of the fact that like in this pop song, Madonna sings, nobody is perfect. Perhaps it is a very true claim for humanity, that we're not perfect beings. Humanity is not perfect. But now science and philosophy and art starts to show it. Now I want to talk a little bit about modernism, in this case, and come back to this idea of perfection and imperfection. So what was modernism? Emergence of modernism. Of course, it is an incredibly interesting thing. First of all, what I said before about globalization before modernism, Before modernism emerged, especially in art in 19th century, but before that in philosophy, as it is commonly thought that modernism starts with René Descartes' cogito ergo sum philosophy,
Hmm.
saying that when a human being knows cogito ergo sum, which means I think, therefore I am, that means I am conscious of my own body, I am conscious
Hmm.
of my existence.
Hmm. Hmm.
In the same way, I could be conscious about everything else. So this is really an idea of consciousness becoming a question of philosophy, question of understanding altogether. And if you look at
Hmm.
philosophy of this time, Descartes followed by British empiricism, for example, or first of all, Spinoza,
Hmm.
Leibniz in Germany, and British empiricism, all about understanding sense, understanding consciousness.
Hmm.
Etienne Balibar, French philosopher, very wonderful French philosopher, Etienne Balibar, in his investigations on John Locke, a French philosopher, sorry, English philosopher, John Locke, he called his research John Locke as an inventor of consciousness. All throughout all the book, he talks about the fact that it is John Locke who invented consciousness rather than Descartes. But what is it about? It means that this, starting from the 17th century, maybe fully, 18th century specifically, these 2 centuries, all philosophy dedicated to understanding of this question of consciousness, uh, understanding, sense, knowledge, with a little bit of skepticism coming from David Hume, a little bit critique
Hmm.
of David Hume coming from Thomas Reid, for example, says we have a common sense. So it's all battle between common sense and intelligence, basically. And that is the time when, preceded to Descartes, there was also a disastrous situation of the Crusades. They finished, yes, Crusades finished. By 11th century already, the Crusades were finished, but uh, um, consequences was very disastrous. Europe was in a very disastrous state. There was nothing to start to rebuild European states. So obviously, and one of the reasons was that during Crusades, all the books that is associated with the Greeks and Romans were destroyed, because European and Crusades invention, Crusades idea was to get rid of all this culture, to build a new Christianity, which is really based on a new European culture. But what kind of culture it is? There was nothing, and one very interesting case, but I think also very much the matter of contingency. Roger Bacon, who was a very important clerk and philosopher at Oxford University, and he was given a task to start to create beginnings of some kind of manual to study for students at Oxford University. So he knew languages, he spoke many languages. Suddenly came across the text written by Arabic scholars. And he actually realized it's not just simply written text. There are also texts that are translations from Greek and Roman texts, especially Greek philosophy, Plato, Aristotle, etc. Aristotelism was very big in the Arabic countries. Um, and that
I
was
believe he was also one of the first people to get translated at Al-Andalus in Cordoba. I think Aristotle was also one of the first people to get translated when that
definitely,
entire translation drive was taking place under the Andalusian scholarship.
definitely. And Averroes, who is Andalusian scholar, who was a philosopher. But also another very important, Aristotelism was so big that in Eastern countries, starting from Baghdad to Mughal empires, Delhi, they were calling him Arastum. Even the name was like used as Arastum. Plato was Aflatun, Aristotle was Plato. What I'm talking, Aristotle was Arastum. This means how cross-circulation of cultures already took place before modernism. Actually, early modernism too. We take philosophy. We talking about Descartes, for example. I don't know how much Descartes knew about Averroes. There are Avicenna, Ibn Sina. I can see a lot of. We can talk about it another time. A lot of connections, to be honest with you. Or some people are now talking about Copernicus actually taking his ideas also from, for example, Nasir-ad-Din Tusi, who was the Iranian astronomer. And now, one very important thing I would like to mention here, to underline, I don't like historians who use these facts to say, we were first. No, not at all. My main idea that ideas really transcirculate, cross-circulate. We have no origins, no original ideas. First, Egyptians started to create myths, these mythologies influenced Indians, Indians influenced Greeks, Greeks influenced Romans, Romans influenced, as we see. Actually, Aristotle came through Romans to Arabic Caliphate, right? And so on. And even in 20th century, if we take French structuralism, Althusser himself said that for understanding of his own Marxism, of contradiction and overdetermination, the role of Chinese philosophy was extremely important. He's using this idea of contradiction, also the idea of the notion of contingency coming from there. And later, 1960s, 1970s, French philosophers were obsessed with China. Godard even made a film called Le Chinoise, like a film which is understanding of revolutionary moment through Chinese. So again, we talk about circulation of cultures, and humanity is based on this circulation of cultures, mutual influences, dialogical influences, rather than fighting against each other to say, it is my origin, it's your origin. There is no such a thing. We have to come to this very important question. Now, after this thing which I said about modernism, for example, of course, modernism was a fantastic invention, beautiful, fascinating. But as I said again, despite it is excluding certain subjects in Europe, especially, black culture, Indian culture, Asian culture altogether, everything that seemed for this time's European artists, if we speak about art, as non-perfect and not known. Even Hegel, he was talking about China, for example, in his book, History of Philosophy, he says very strange things. He says, well, Chinese could not be philosophers because they couldn't invent the alphabet. Strange idea, they said alphabet in itself and for itself already intelligence. This is really a kind of, and again, I don't want to denigrate Hegel or any of modernists, but that is another very important thing which I want to talk about, which Bernard Stiegler, my friend and the person who unfortunately died, a very important philosopher of our times, who re-established this idea of pharmakon that comes from Greek philosophy. The pharmakon, to put in a crude terms, we buy a tablet in a pharmacy for the headache. It first is poisonous, then it is remedy. So culture, this cross circulation also has been birth, poison and remedy. That is why people in desperation constantly trying to see, oh, my origins is here, but you go. But these fights are going about this kind of misunderstanding or not being able to understand this oxymoronic, so to speak, oxymoronic nature of culture in general. That is all about. I think we must. Two or three things to make the subject of our work is, first of all, is understanding of process as it comes from Alfred North Whitehead, which has been specifically in a very particular way taken by Gilles Deleuze. And what was the sociologist you mentioned?
Bourdieu, Pierre Bourdieu.
Yeah, absolutely. But also actor network theory.
Bruno Latour.
Bruno Latour, yes. And now it's also continues in a very recent philosophy, which I find Graham Harman being very much object-oriented ontology. I'm not saying I'm entirely, I'm also, I'm working. I mean, there are things which we can criticize, which we can accept. But the good news, amidst all this growth of essentialisms, amidst growing of nationalism, etc., there is a philosophy which says, no, we have to also think about non-essentialism. We also have to think that there is nothing wrong with globalization. We must take all these things seriously. We must take differences seriously. We must really learn to understand the world again. My friend Stuart Holt, just to finish, who actually, he said, I remember him saying something very often, we must constantly learn skills of surfing because the world is changing and we must change with this too. If we leave our dogmatic ideas as it is, then we will move to nowhere. And of course, modernism, which other side of this modernism, which many people don't talk about it, despite it is excluding certain subjects to be imperfect, it has also opened up the possibilities to debates, as we know, already starting from 1960s, feminism, third world struggles, questions of gender, sexuality that are very largely debated today, and not always in a perfectly understood way, with a lots of challenges, with lots of problems. Sometimes you look and you feel sorry for people that they don't understand very basic things. We are, as human beings, this is one of the very interesting things that I like about post-human debate, although otherwise I don't, I find it often very, very, very strange, most of the people involved in this post-humanist debate. But one of the things which I find very important, that human is not the center of the planet. We are really, like as often said, like one of those beings in the world, and we have to understand ourselves being among beings, which connects us to the world, to a world immediate around us, but also larger way on a planetary scale. I will stop here, perhaps.
Zeigam, I just wanted to kind of probe you further on the conversation of translations and the importance of translations in this entire, conversation around modernism before, globalization before modernism.
Yes.
Because this is, again, one of the key factors that we also discussed in many of our conversations on WhatsApp call and also on Zoom, as to how translations and the act of translation itself becomes so important and pertinent towards understanding these other larger ideas that existed. For instance, again, the act of translations itself at Andalusia, giving way to so many cross-cultural, possibilities of exchange of ideas, right?
Yes.
If
Yes.
you could, if you might want to maybe, elaborate more on the act of translation or the idea of translation.
Definitely. First of all, I would talk about I don't necessarily like a personal experience thing, but there is a very good reason you will see why. My own experience. I was born in Azerbaijan, yes, former Soviet Union, actually. Russian language was very important for us. My first language, Azerbaijani, second language, Russian. All the world cultures, starting from as a child, I remember reading Victor Hugo, for example, or Rabindranath Tagore, or Heinrich Heine. All of this I was reading in Russian. Russians translated world, culture into Russian. That were not something not yet was available in Azerbaijani language, although they also were working on it. So this is one of the very proofs of the fact that how we learn other cultures through, it's learning European culture through Russian language. So it's like a triple translation in many ways. So, but coming back to Andalusian particularly, very important because, of course, one of the caliphates, Renaissance developed around Andalusian and around, of course, Baghdad, but also in different parts of the caliphate. We must say, first of all, that not all these people were Arabic. Yeah, now we have today in a global world, we have Indian artists, we have um, American artists, English artists, Russian artists working all together, and nobody really thinks about their origins. It was exactly similar during the Caliphate. The Avicenna Ibn Sina was Uzbek, who lived in Khwarezm, in today's Uzbekistan. Averroes lived in Andalusia, actually. I think he was living in Andalusia. Al-Ghazali lived in Persia, in Tehran. And Nasiruddin Tusi, who we mentioned, was living in Tabriz, close to Tabriz. So this is really, again, different nationalities involved doing similar things, trying to understand the world, first of all, natural world, and also human world on a very planetary scale, not to mention Indian scholars of this time. So Andalusian philosophy brought up very interesting thing, but for example, in terms of understanding of consciousness. Averroes, for example, was very interested in critique of essentialism that I was talking about now. Well, it is very particular, I think, which is complicated philosopher. Averroes was very complicated philosopher, like Spinoza. I mentioned just because Spinoza was aware of. He also was thinking that something as similar to pantheism of Spinoza. He was also thinking that in the world, all the people are connected to each other. There is no such a thing, like we should not separate the different nations. I said that is very important because we are all created by God. But this thing, of course, to us, to contemporary people, especially to atheists like me, at the first glance seems pretty peculiar because you say, why God? But then I realized, for example, I think Spinoza, who is one of my most favorite philosophers when I was student of philosophy, I was reading him very clearly written. I saw, oh, wonderful, clear, but I thought I understood him. Now I'm 60 years old. Now I say, oh, wow, I understand why Spinoza was always mentioning God, but himself almost an atheist. The same thing possible to say about Averroes, because they saw in this some kind of substance, some kind of something there to start from. But of course, they also knew that there is no such a thing. We have no proof of existence of something like this. So in other words, and Spinoza and Averroes and Andalusian scholars understood that they are talking about some kind of process which is based on what we can see here and now, like Hegel would say, but without knowing where it comes from and where it moves to. So it is a process. They didn't talk about it then because it's very complicated. By the way, Andalusians worked still under very strict rule of the Caliphate, and you couldn't say anything against Islam. So nevertheless, they found ways of speaking about these questions in a very particular language. So the understanding was that the world is not really about beginning here, ending somewhere. The question of infinity was a very important question, which hopefully philosophy will return again as one of the advantages of modernism, critique of modernism, which goes by postmodernists also was, for example, Kant. Kant has a famous piece written in 1794, Das Ende alle Dinge, and the end of all things. He was obsessed with finding ends, some kind of beginning, some kind of end, because it also came from Protestant religion. Of course, there's a lot of question that the conditions in which people live, somehow philosophy should have worked for the society also. So we have to understand that all these moments, like Michel Foucault said, epistemic moments, every period has its own episteme because every society demands its own understanding, how we should live. We don't want to know just abstract concepts. We want to know something that helps us to go on to living. So it was, on the one hand, Kant's very proper understanding that there is no such a thing like the end. Infinity is very much in place. But on the other hand, he had to find this idea of a kingdom of ends, as he said, as a categorical imperative. But if we go back to before modernism, back again, Averroes and Ibn Sina, they are freely talking about infinity. Yeah. And I believe that we have to bring back this beautiful idea of infinity, which has many, many beautiful things about it. Also, of course, it shows that our world is infinite, open-ended, and never even probably some, in some ways to say open, maybe it is even wrong, but contingent, definitely.
Yeah, and just to kind of add or just to kind of add further to this, again, this whole conversation, the literal act of translation itself, bringing about a lot of these ideas of consciousness. For you spoke of consciousness very many times
Yeah.
in your conversation. Again,
Yes.
the role of translations in bringing out the idea of consciousness, which would quote unquote be indigenous to certain non-European cultures. That too kind of adding to this idea of understanding infinity, so to say. Because by and large, a large part of a large part of what our consciousness today, at least, is informed by a lot of these very Eurocentric models of philosophical understanding and ideas of modernism. So I think
Yeah.
that further kind of going back and further kind of trying to build on these more indigenous models. Do you think that might be something that, of course, we also discussed this, that it comes with a double-edged sword, where
Yes.
this idea of, as you also pointed out,
Yeah.
historians saying that we're the originals,
Yes.
we kind of started it all off.
Yes.
That too kind of starts affecting things. But what in your opinion, or what in your what do you feel could be the potential ways to exploit these indigenous knowledge systems to talk about this idea of consciousness?
Yes, yes, very good question, and you're absolutely correct. You understood me. I was going to say that it's double-edged moment of consciousness. We have, I think, we have to try to understand all of this. It's plural notions in one notion. Consciousness itself, for example, has two sides to it. Let's put it plainly. Cogito ergo sum, the Kantian idea of cogito ergo sum, by many philosophers understood, by good philosophers it is understood as my existence, which proves existence of other things also. But by bad philosophers, mean essentialist philosophers like Heidegger, for example, it understood like Eigenlichkeit. There is a term in German language, Eigenlichkeit, my sphere of my own-ness. So there's two sides to it. Either you understand consciousness as something, as a tool to understand the world, rather than saying, it's my origin, I am coming from Azerbaijan, I'm indigenous person. Another side of it, I am here, I am zero, I start from this zero towards infinity. And my existence is a constant formation, being conscious. Another person, just contra Heidegger, who was Heidegger's student, Hannah Arendt, one of my favorite philosophers, she said completely very important thing in her book, Human Condition, very, very important work, and one of my most influential philosophers, actually, the person who never called herself a philosopher. She says, being conscious is the way of existence. She has even very interesting phrase. One say, people have no. She talks about human rights. About it's a text. There is a talk which is called "The Right to Have a Right." Very good phrase. So we have no right to obey. Yeah, it's very beautiful. Because if we're conscious of ourselves, we don't need to obey anything. We don't need to. So this split of consciousness, one working my ego, etc., from my ego and the id this question come from. Yeah, we could go into all this. Of course, we have no time, unfortunately. But this just one thing, a very important thing that comes to my mind, it's critique given by Theodor Adorno, very important book, Jargon of Authenticity. I really like this phrase, Jargon der Eigenlichkeit. It is written in
Hmm.
1935. It was directed against Heidegger, by the way. Heidegger, who
Hmm.
in 1933 came, hailed Hitler, who became a rector, who got rid of his teacher Husserl, who
Yes.
died out of... And we have now, Satyajit, Heidegger is a main philosopher everywhere, all the universities you go. And I have no problem with that. But this is what is toxic situation. This is what pharmacon is about. You see what I mean?
Yes.
And
Yes.
Bernard
Yes.
himself was involved in criticizing this Heideggerian side all the time.
Yes.
Because, it's all very much about this globalization and modernism, because this is around this kind of ideas, the whole idea of globalization exists. As far as we accept our lives as a process and our signs of our life as contingent, and our dialogue and translation
Hmm.
as connecting us like a chronotop, bacterian chronotop, then we are in a good company. But unfortunately, today it is out of focus. This is a problem, even in art world.
Hmm.
I have a little criticism about art world. First of all, I'm very happy. My friend Christian Cravana, who's a great art historian, who recently told me, "Oh, it's so wonderful. Early 1990s coming to London, you could go to Tate Modern, you could see only Western artists. Now you come here, you can see very different artists from all over Africa, Asia, which is, I think, excellent. Well, I am happy. Finally, it has started. But on the other hand, I also think that little bit of we should also make sure there should be things that should also be made possible that white artists and people of different colors, people of different backgrounds, and white artists, right, work together. This connectivity is very important. This the most dangerous thing if history turns other way around. Yeah,
Yeah.
if feminism destroys men, if black destroys white, or other way around, if this would be a disaster. I'm afraid this is now where I can see this little bit of this problem, or maybe even quite a lot. So I think the role of art today would be actually, in my opinion, to try to create this idea of non-essentialist approach, the approach of process as which we talk with you now, Satyajit, to bring back into the artistic experience, along with us, all these wonderful narratives, wonderful stories that people, um, you know, excluded from the art history talk about. From
Yes.
India, from Asia, all over, from Africa, from Zimbabwe artists. It is fantastic, beautiful. It is expanding the world. It is creating. It shows how infinite art is. It is just we're now only starting to learn what is excluded from history. These things existed. We have no idea. Like what Hamlet says to Horatio in Shakespeare. There are things, my friend Horatio, we could not even imagine. And Marx liked this like this passage from Shakespeare.
Hmm.
Marx liked reading Shakespeare quite a lot because there
Hmm.
are things we cannot even imagine. So
Hmm.
thank God we have started this openness that is happening at the moment.
Yeah.
And I think that's the role of translation, of course.
Yes. No, and that was actually my last question to you. How do you kind of position art in this entire situation? How could and you kind of you answered it as a part of as an extension of your response. No, I feel this could be Zeigam, a beginning of a very very good beginning of a lot of idea sharing, and we hope to have you in India very very soon as a part of
Thank you.
very many projects that we could that we would be working on together. And we'll be uploading this session on YouTube. And hopefully we can also hopefully we'll have a lot more engagement on comments and on further, and maybe with those series of comments, with those series of questions, we could maybe at a later date do
Yes.
a part two of this, and open this up with also maybe one or two other speakers as a part of that session. Thank you so much, Zeigam. Thank you for agreeing to give your time. Thank you for being so kind with sharing ideas, and we hope to see you very very soon, and a lot more of you.
Likewise, Satyajit, thank you very much for inviting me, being so kind to me. It's very nice of you. And I hope I do my best to continue our conversation. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you, Ziga.